Skyler, Reinhardt. Welcome if you're new. If you happen to see the rage post that I had for Monty McNair and the Kings ownership, welcome as well. It is wonderful to have you on board. That was a flash of deep burning passion, and I promise I'm not always that harsh and malicious, but yeah, that had to get out. I think Shank is just my personal venting platform. I love basketball, obviously. Business consultant by trade, so everything I do is oriented around a framework or a model, up-level everything to a strategic takeaway. The whole vision of this is putting the what into the so what for our funny world of sports. So the probably best play-in matchup to date since the whole thing was introduced back in the bubble. Memphis Grizzlies, Golden State Warriors, they have some bad blood everybody was aware of, but the game itself really didn't disappoint for a lot of reasons, not just for the teams themselves, but speaking to the broader playoffs in the pipeline. Number one is the worrisome whistle. I tweeted a bunch about this, but there were 4 specific instances that I hand-tracked during the game like a psychopath. 3 Grizzlies starters hit with, in my opinion, very, very ticky-tack fouls. A hip-to-hip touch with Jimmy Butler on the baseline, getting Edey maybe for his third. Steph Curry doing the classic Chris Paul, I'm going to run into you from behind, throw myself onto the ground. It was on Jaren Jackson. Looney gets that late touch, probably a mutual foul on Edey about 3 feet away from the basket. It looked like Looney was kind of holding his arm, but ultimately as well, it did look like Edey got there kind of clean. Probably most infamous moment of the entire game, the call on Pippen for his 5th foul when he tried to block Jimmy Butler from behind, and on replay, literally didn't even touch him, but it was called from the official directly behind the play. Had a good feeling from that angle that there probably was contact. Shouldn't be called in the first place if we are loyal to the vision and the spirit of how the playoffs are traditionally officiated. To make matters even worse, gave the Grizzlies a bunch of makeup calls really, really late. Hats off to Brandon Pajemski. All ball, kid got up really high, but of course was whistled for the foul. Really was the driving force behind the Grizzlies even getting themselves in the position to send the game to overtime. Point being, this to me is the worst possible optics that a NBA officiating crew can actually give themselves. It is one thing to officiate a game with a loose whistle, but to do that consistently from start to finish, at least both teams can acclimate and game plan and react in the moment. What we actually end up sawing, the Golden State Warriors recognizing they were up against a much less experienced, younger, and overall less mature Memphis Grizzlies team that is well known, specifically to the extent that they were trying to basically force the issue. You will see Steph Curry's very first touch in this game, swan diving on the floor, trying to bait a 4-point play, possessing the ball for maybe in total 0.4 seconds, rises and fires and tries to play on the ground, just like a Dame Lillard. Very next possession for the Warriors, you have Draymond Green getting screened by Jaren Jackson, immediately launches himself on the floor like he just got hit by a bus, gets himself riled up, as well as, of course, the crowd trying to lure them into freaking out at the officials, and again, forcing the issue as early as possible on the referees, fully knowing that the Memphis Grizzlies' biggest advantage was their size, athleticism, and theoretical physicality. Hey, this is a foul, and we're going to put you in for a very long night with a lot of complaints and a lot of jeers from the crowd because we know that we need it essentially to stay in the game. And honestly, they were pretty much correct. This is going to be an enormous theme at the onset of these games, and particularly with the Warriors have to, in many ways, play their classic brand of small ball. It unlocks the best of their strengths on both ends of the floor. Very, very obvious that they are going to be leaning on the officials to essentially keep them afloat, especially when the other team has a great matchup on Curry. Top free throw rate in the league post Jimmy Butler trade, projecting it forward to even more and possibly worse size disadvantageous matchups against teams like the Rockets. Would not be surprised to see 3 different really egregious flops from the big 3 in Golden State to kick off every single game of the Rockets series. Simply an enormous equalizer for their type of basketball they want to play, being small ball. Back to the officials, though, the idea of the playoffs has always been enshrined in the belief that the whistles are going to be looser or harsher, stricter. More physicality will be allowed, and that is a hallmark and a staple of the postseason, where it is going to be even visually more exhausting and draining and competitive in that way. Not a coincidence with your Lakers in no big man defensive centerpiece also having Luka and Reeves there to implement their own great equalizer at the free throw line. I'm just saying it is really pushing the envelope and giving me some hesitation as far as what kind of whistle we're going to get and ultimately the product we are going to get in the postseason. You think about Shai Gilgeous, barely have to unpack any of that. Golden State Warriors now with Jimmy Butler leading free throw rate since whatever. The Lakers, who have Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, 2 of the most notorious grifting lead guards in the entire NBA. And then you have Jokic and Kawhi. That's where I get really interested, and it is kind of a disappointing reality that the 2 of those teams are gonna play each other, because I think when you have both teams grifting, like if we were to get a Lakers Golden State series, we're probably gonna get north of 30 free throws a night just for the sake of keeping these games relatively competitive and not have to eject Luka Doncic 3 out of 7 games. Just pointing this out ahead of time, it probably won't be as physical or exciting as you remember, which is very sad. Okay, camera died, but we're back and alive. Memphis takes. I'll get to the Warriors after. Don't freak out. Edey was not ready to be force-fed as a primary mode or method of driving sustainable and effective offense, primarily because he's just very slow. It kind of reminds me of a high school friend who was over 6'5" at the age of 17. It's not like he's tripping over himself, just very clear disconnects between his like mental coordination and the spatial and body awareness that he has manifested itself in how long it just takes him to literally take an entry pass when he is posting up on the block to just raise the ball above his head and get it near the rim. In that span of time, Gary Payton, Jimmy Butler, whoever the closest Warrior was to provide help, could easily get their hands all over the ball, wrap him up, or crowd him into potential walks, and he just got very flustered very quickly. On top of that, the lacking facilitation and passing chops out of those positions, you can't really fault him for just being a rookie. Those kinds of reads are higher level and pretty sophisticated. But the other one that really got to me was the unwillingness to embrace and leverage his own size to get himself to the free throw line even more, clearly succumbing to the very amplified and magnified physicality from your GP2s and Draymonds and Jimmys, particularly the help defenders, where he wasn't even slamming his arms into anybody ways you would expect. Let's say Anthony Davis, he would have gotten to the free throw line about 40 times in that game just based on how rabidly the Warriors were attacking Edey in those positions. In his defense, the whistle was clearly not in his favor. Again, looking at the Warriors stuff, they had pressed the envelope and issue and racked up a lot of fouls on his end. And understanding that size mismatch, they just got in his head and he was just scared he was going to get called for these offensive fouls. Ended up being terrified, petrified of the physicality from the Warriors. 2 is that Scottie Pippen Jr. can fucking play. I know that the Tyus Jones comparisons are going to fly around everywhere, but I caught myself thinking often that he had a level of toughness that Tyus has just never displayed, most notably in those moments where offensively Memphis needed somebody to just break the ice. It was pretty clear, do we feed Edey? Do we try to get Ja to essentially ISO? Pippen's out here just halfway to the basket between that and the midline when the Warriors inevitably turn the ball over and press the issue in that short mid-range region, even finishing through contact, but again, even in the half court, taking the initiative to make hard cuts and make good reads, go off ball, on ball, doing the Tyus Jones parts. Just thought was pretty notable. Definitely is kind of in that Memphis Grizzly mold of having that tenacity and fearlessness. Probably most importantly, obviously there is no Jalen Wells, but I thought he was outstanding defensively on Steph Curry in this game, given his physical limitations. Obviously, the physical advantages that Jalen Wells at his size and profile will give you against a smaller guard like Steph, it's indisputable. Disrupting Curry off ball, going through screens, staying absolutely glued to him in the course of this insane marathon, doing switchbacks across a fucking court all night. You're gonna have breakdowns, and obviously Steph got those, especially late in the game. But I just came away thinking, yeah, Steph got his, but just looking and panning away from a lot of these actions, and especially looking at some of the calls again that Steph was getting at that free throw line, I actually didn't really come away feeling like Steph had his better playoff games, which I'll get to. Bane is just that dude, go-to initiator down the stretch, and honestly, I felt the most comfortable with the ball in his hands. Clearly had it going outside from the shooting perspective, but just the level of fearlessness and pressure both downhill and on the outside. I just thought he was toggling really, really well, creating those sorts of downhill advantages. Obviously, he's launching a lot of big-time shots late. A couple of them were basically in and out. One of them goes in. Maybe we're having a completely different conference matchup, like the fact that Tomas, the brand new Grizzlies coach, at least tried to draw up that last play for Bane on that weak side flare out. And yeah, it was the right call to play. Obviously, this is a young, probably not the most mature, not the most experienced team who just fired its coach a week before the postseason. So not surprising. Next, Jaren Jackson Jr. is literally Karl Anthony Towns about 2 to 3 years ago. Poor body control, spatial awareness, getting stripped on the back end, anticipating those kinds of reads. Most importantly to me, drives only to ever score. I think a lot of people had this kind of irk with Cat in the olden days back in Minnesota. He was kind of out of control, taking on drives and trying to really use his physicality like a wild animal. And then you saw last year in the postseason where he led his own team in assists to Rudy Gobert. That is the classic elevation as a secondary, tertiary offensive node within a formidable playoff system, where you have to be able to recognize and capitalize those kinds of advantages, whether it's double big kind of lineups and having these kinds of size mismatches, invite or literally fucking tell your team to start cutting when I do this because I'm super fucking tall and Draymond Green is 4 inches shorter than me. Maybe I just won't try to get to my left hand or right hand floater every single time I drive to the basket. Really doing Golden State a favor in my opinion, and just for funsies, a regular season stat that I think underpins this concept the best. More than half of his shots this year were from three. I think part of that, I have to think, has to do with the whole Edey introduction. If you feed Jackson the ball, unlike last year without any of his star peers on the court, really felt like there were opportunities, especially in cross matches on a bunch of sort of turnovers and the offensive rebounds that Edey was able to get. Just like, dude, if you have a mismatch, you don't have to try to fucking score every time. I know this is groundbreaking insight here, and it's probably not as bad as it probably feels, but I'm just so tired of this guy settling for threes, but that is just the surface. The underlying root cause for me is you have to learn how to pass. You need to be able to present rim pressure, but understand and recognize how a twin tower model operates, kind of similar to your Jokic's, your Houston's. Really thought he showed promise in last year. I just didn't really feel confident with him having the ball, honestly, whatsoever. So last but not least, non-existent veteran presence and the new coach. Obviously, everybody's just going to look at the last play, had a chance to tie it up. Yes, a new coach and firing it, and haha, you get what you reap. I feel like the much bigger point that needs to be broadcasted here is that the oldest guy on this roster is 29 years old, and this team is not really known for its maturity in the first place, and really not known to be able to keep its hands to itself and avoid foul trouble as well, even with some suspect whistles in play. Don't really hear that being broadcasted, and ultimately when you find yourself in those super high pressure, intense moments, you have Santi Aldama freezing up, clamming up, just something to be mindful of. And sure, Oklahoma City, for example, their oldest guy is Alex Caruso at 30 years old, but you can see a little bit of the difference when you have such a solidified system in place, as well as, of course, the continuity and brilliance of a coach like Dagnall. Rapid fire with the Warriors now. Number one, the defense worked really, really great in this game against Memphis's fake size. Clearly, we're the veteran team in this matchup, really pushing the envelope in the physicality and roping in the officials early on. Great tactical work with its basically Oklahoma City-esque defensive swiping and swarming model on its very slow bigs. It honestly reminded me a lot of OKC. Pretty much every time this slow and extremely young, gigantic rookie got the fucking ball, I just kind of felt like this is the ideal sort of matchup for the high end of the physicality meter that the Warriors can offer with a center like Anthony Davis, Derek Lively. We'll see it with Şengün and Steven Adams, a little bit more experienced and tactical and understanding of how to get themselves to the free throw line. I don't know how convinced I am that the Warriors are like figured out how to beat these big twin towers and all this crazy physicality. Two, Steph wasn't who he'll have to be. I expected much better, air quote, normal production from him throughout this game. Yes, he went pretty nuclear down the stretch, but in the meat of the game, and particularly during the comeback by Memphis, which I always hone in on when you have these kinds of really good teams that do end up gifting some life back to the other team, and it becomes pretty close. I'm not sure that the Warriors pull this off without some of the accumulated suspect whistles, I'm sorry, that only the Warriors were getting throughout this game. And again, it's not just about the late game stuff. Yes, the Pajemski thing comes in later on, but in my opinion, that is a makeup call. And the psychological impact of putting guys in foul trouble so early in this game, it's unquantifiably larger, in my opinion. And again, the point being, Steph was able to buoy his own box score counting stats through that kind of softer whistle. And as a team, those free throws literally were the reason that they were able to pull this game off. Because honestly, given the game that Steph had, if he's making those last two back-to-back threes, without the scoreboard cushion that they had. I don't know, man. If you find yourself now you're down 3 or down 2, and all of a sudden this first 3 is for the lead over a team that came into your building and has done all of the things in the past to build this sort of rivalry atmosphere, maybe they both don't go in. All I do know is that the thumb injury was definitely notable. He re-injured it seemed like slightly in Pippen's shirt, which is absolutely valid. But given Wells wasn't even in the game, I honestly would have expected him to get about the same amount of production, but really dismantle the other team more as a focal point. But I didn't really feel it. And again, thinking and projecting to Houston, look, man, if you can't fucking get yourself going right away, or as I'm predicting, you're going to have to flail and try and call in as much attention to the physicality off ball as you can, as early as you can, get a spotlight on it right away. I don't know how much easier it's going to get when you are the one wearing yourself out all game, trying to pry Amen Thompson off of you throughout the course of the game. Is it going to get easier? I don't know. I doubt it. Butler looked great against the immature Grizzlies as well. I mean, he just psychologically disintegrated both Edey and Triple J. I just felt like they were perfect prisoners of Jimmy's foul pressure, where every time Jimmy went to the rim, I felt like I was watching some of the most unnatural guarding and contesting motions. Absolutely petrified and had no idea how to actually guard him without risking more and more calls. And so my biggest takeaway, how sustainable is Jimmy's kind of foul pressure to unlock or create those kinds of advantages? Going to be against smarter, wiser, more athletic defenders, and ones who are willing to meet the foul and physicality pressure or tone early in the game. Last but not least, the bench was glaring. GP2, 12 points, post 11, Pajemski only 3, and Moody 9. Really did not feel them much in this game, and brings it full circle back to the fact that, again, the incredible defensive stand and turnovers that they generated earlier in the game were great and had to be a little more sustained for me to come away feeling like it was going to hold up 2 series from now. For example, these other guys had to definitely be better for those sorts of free throws and turnovers to really not be essential and required in order to pull off this win.